We don't always know what a family is until we watch someone try to carry one by herself. Nicole Sanders wasn't looking for a fight. She was looking for a seat at the table where her son didn't have to earn the right to belong. The way she tells it, the pain wasn't loud. It was careful. It was practiced. And it lasted for years. Here's where she starts. I still remember the sound my tires made in my parents' driveway in Westerville, Ohio. Not loud. Just that small crunch of winter gravel that made the whole trip feel real all at once. Theo was in the back seat, kicking his feet softly, humming the same little tune he always hummed when he was excited. He had his coat zipped wrong, one side higher than the other. He didn't care. He was holding a paper gift bag against his chest like it was treasure. "Mom, I want Grandma to open mine first," he said, smiling big enough to fog the window. Brian reached back from the passenger seat and straightened Theo's collar with 2 fingers, gentle and quick. "She's going to love it," Brian said. His voice stayed calm, like he was making a promise he could control. I wanted to believe it. We walked up to the porch with our hands full. Theo's bag was the lightest thing there, but he carried it like it weighed 100 pounds. I rang the bell. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened, and my mother's face appeared, already wearing that smile that looked correct from a distance. "Nicky," Linda said, leaning in for a side hug that ended before it started. Theo stepped forward before I could guide him. "Hi, Grandma." He held out the bag with both hands. "I made you something." Linda crouched, but it felt like a performance, like she was matching the height of a child because the moment required it. Her eyes flicked to the bag, then to me, then back to him. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Theo nodded fast. "Yes, your grandma." Linda took the bag like a stranger handing her a flyer outside a grocery store. She peeked inside, saw the paper, and gave a small smile that didn't move the rest of her face. "Oh, that's sweet," she said, standing up again. My dad's voice came from inside, distracted and flat. "Hey." Gary didn't come to the door. He stayed near the living room, remote in hand, watching a sports show like we'd walked into the wrong house. Brian offered his hand anyway. Gary took it with a quick squeeze, eyes already drifting back to the screen. Theo hovered by my leg, still smiling, but smaller now, like he was folding himself in. We moved into the kitchen. The house smelled like cinnamon and something buttery, warm in a way that made me remember childhood holidays before I learned to read a room. Theo's boots squeaked on the tile. "Mom, can I put Grandma's present by her plate?" he asked. "Sure," I told him. My voice came out too bright. He tiptoed toward the dining table and set the bag down with care, like it could break. A quiet pause landed over the room. Not silence. Something tighter than that. We've seen that kind of pause before. It's the kind people don't notice unless they've lived inside it. Theo turned back to us. Still trying. I made a picture of us. Brian's hand found my back, steadying without pressing. "Looks good, buddy," Brian said. And Theo nodded like that was enough to keep going. Some stories don't start with shouting. Sometimes they start with a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. If this one stays with you, pass it along. The table was set with surgical precision. White plates, heavy silverware, and napkins folded into stiff peaks. It was a room designed for appearances, as if order alone could keep the truth from leaking out. Theo climbed into his chair, tucking his legs under him, a habit he had when he felt the need to take up less space. Brian sat beside him, sliding his own plate closer. Without a word. Brian tore a piece of bread and set half of it near Theo's fork. It was a quiet anchor in a room full of drifting shadows. Linda poured the tea, the liquid hitting the china with a soft, rhythmic splash. Gary cleared his throat and angled his chair toward the television in the next room, keeping one foot in a reality where we didn't exist. Rebecca arrived last with Jason, her hand resting on her son's shoulder as she guided him to the seat directly across from Theo. For a few minutes, the illusion held. Forks clinked. Someone mentioned the Ohio winter. Linda asked Brian about his firm in a tone so neutral it felt hollow. Then, Jason leaned back, his heels hitting the rungs of his chair. He looked straight at Theo, not with anger, but with a terrifying, borrowed casualness. "Grandma said you're not really her grandson," Jason said. The words didn't just land, they echoed. Theo froze, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink. He simply lowered his hand and stared at the tablecloth as if a hole had just opened up in the center of the world. I waited. I waited for my mother to gasp, for Rebecca to scold, for Gary to look up. Instead, Linda took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. Rebecca let out a sharp, nervous giggle that cut through the silence like a blade. Gary focused intensely on the gristle of his steak. The silence wasn't an accident. It was an agreement. Brian pushed his chair back. The sound of wood on tile was the only honest thing in the room. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He stood up, walked over to the sideboard, and picked up the handmade gift bag Theo had left there earlier. He tucked it firmly under his arm. "At least now we know who the lowest person at this table really is," Brian said. His voice was cold, leveled at the adults who had let a child do their dirty work. He held Theo's coat open. Theo stood up immediately, sliding his arms into the sleeves. He didn't look back. He pressed his face into Brian's side for a heartbeat before they walked toward the door. "We're leaving," Brian stated. "You're seriously walking out over a kid's comment?" Rebecca called out, her voice rising in defensive annoyance. No one stopped us. No one apologized. Outside, the air was bitter. As I buckled Theo into his seat, I saw him reach out. Brian handed him the paper bag, the one Linda hadn't even bothered to fully open. Theo clutched it to his chest as if he were reclaiming a piece of himself. By the time we turned the corner, Theo was asleep, his head resting against the glass, finally safe within the small, fierce borders of our own family. Theo slept through the night without waking, which almost made it worse. He curled on his side with one hand tucked under his cheek, breathing slow and even, like his body had decided to shut the whole evening down for him. Brian and I sat on opposite ends of the couch. The television was on, volume low, neither of us watching. "I should have said something sooner," Brian said finally, eyes still on the screen. "You did exactly what you needed to," I told him. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "You got him out." Brian nodded once. "I just hate that he heard it at all." "So do I." We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't anything useful left to say. My phone buzzed just after midnight. The screen lit up the room in a thin blue line. Linda's name sat there like it had every other year around this time. I didn't open it right away. I already knew it wouldn't mention Theo. When I did, the message was short. "Did you already send the family help this year?" No apology. No acknowledgement. Just that. Brian watched my face change. "What is it?" I handed him the phone. He read it, then set it face down on the table without comment. I typed slowly, not because I didn't know what to say, because I wanted every word to land exactly where it needed to. "We won't be sending anything this year." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then added one more line. "We need space." I sent it before I could soften it. The response didn't come that night, or the next morning, or the day after. That silence felt strange, not peaceful, more like standing under a bridge, waiting for the echo you know is coming. On the third day, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. Linda's name flashed again. I let it go to voicemail. A message came through instead. My card was declined at the pharmacy. I assume this is a mistake. Brian leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, listening without intruding. I typed back with one hand, socks still balled in the other. It wasn't a mistake. I set the phone down and finished folding Theo's shirts, one small sleeve after another, Lining them up like order still meant something. The email arrived the next morning, formatted the way my father liked to format things. Short paragraphs, bullet points, white space. Like that made the message easier to accept. The subject line read, "Concerns." Brian was pouring coffee when I opened it. He watched me from the counter, waiting for my face to tell him what kind of day it was about to be. Gary's message didn't waste time. He wrote that my decision was impulsive, that it didn't reflect the values I was raised with, that families don't abandon each other over misunderstandings. He reminded me, point by point, of everything they had ever done for me. College help, babysitting once, years ago, holidays hosted. At the bottom, one last line sat by itself. "I hope you aren't letting Brian turn you against your own family." Brian set the mug down a little harder than necessary. "That's new," he said. I scrolled back up and read it again. Slower this time, not to absorb it, to notice what wasn't there. Theo's name didn't appear once. The phone rang around noon. Linda's voice came through tight and controlled, the way it gets when she's standing in public and trying not to make a scene. "I was at the pharmacy." She said, "They told me my card wouldn't go through." "I know." A pause. I pictured her at the counter, people lined up behind her, tapping their feet. "This is really how you're handling it," she said, "letting me be embarrassed like that. I told you we needed space. What you did was punish us." She replied, over a child's comment. Brian shifted beside me but stayed quiet. "That wasn't a comment." I said, "It was the truth you didn't correct." She exhaled sharply. "You're overreacting. You always have." The line went dead. That afternoon, Rebecca texted, "Everyone's upset. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. Can't you just smooth this over like you usually do?" I stared at the screen until it dimmed. That evening, Brian came home with a thin stack of mail and dropped it on the table. "Your dad called my office. He said, not angry. Careful. Didn't get through. Left a message with reception." My stomach dropped. He said there was a family emergency. Brian added, "They didn't put him through." We sat at the table long after dinner, Theo playing on the floor nearby, lining up his cars by color. No one asked about him, not once. And for the first time, I stopped trying to explain why that hurt. Theo was in his room. The rhythmic click-clack of plastic blocks providing the only soundtrack to the heavy silence in the kitchen. It was the kind of focused, solitary play he retreated to when the world outside felt too loud or unpredictable. Brian waited until the bedroom door was pulled nearly shut before he looked at me. "There's something I should have told you months ago," he said. I was wiping the granite counter, which was already spotless. I just needed my hands to be busy so they wouldn't start shaking. "Okay." He didn't sit. He leaned against the heavy oak table, his fingers gripping the edge as if he needed an anchor to keep from drifting away. "I've been keeping Linda and Gary afloat longer than you realize. But I didn't use our joint checking." I stopped wiping and looked up. "What do you mean?" "Longer." He exhaled. A long, weary sound. "I've been using my personal performance account, the one my quarterly bonuses go into. It's separate from our household budget, so the fluctuations didn't show up in our shared statements. I didn't want the burden of their failures to land on your shoulders." The kitchen suddenly felt cramped, the air thick with the weight of a year's worth of secrets. "How long?" "Brian," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. 11 months, he said. The number hung in the air like a sentence. It started with their second mortgage. They were 3 months behind, and the predatory lender they used was threatening a default. I didn't want you caught in the middle of their panic. I leaned back against the cold sink. "How much were you sending?" "A little over $3,000 a month," he replied. "More when the adjustable interest rate spiked or the late fees stacked up. I set up an automatic draw so they wouldn't have to keep asking. I thought if I took the financial pressure off, they'd have the emotional capacity to actually see our son." I closed my eyes. The math was devastating, not just the money, but the hope behind it. You thought you could buy kindness. I thought I could purchase decency, he corrected, his voice cracking. I thought if their world was stable, they wouldn't feel the need to be so small. I was trying to buy Theo a place at their table. The hallway floorboard creaked as Theo shifted in his room. Brian glanced toward the sound, his expression softening into something raw and protective. I wasn't protecting them. Nicole, he said firmly. I was trying to shield our kid from the reality of who they are. My throat tightened. I nodded, the motion feeling mechanical. But they still said it. They still let Jason weaponize their words right in front of him. I know, Brian said, his shoulders finally dropping as the weight of the secret left him. And the second the payments stopped, they didn't ask about Theo. They didn't ask if we were okay. They just asked for the money. He looked at me, the crease between his eyebrows deeper than I'd ever seen it. They're not angry because we stopped helping. They're angry because they realized they don't own us anymore. I'm done trying to earn their respect, I said, looking toward the closed door of our son's room. So am I. Brian agreed. In the other room, a block tower tumbled, followed by Theo's bright, unburdened laugh. Brian stood up and headed toward the sound, finally stepping out of the shadows and into the only light that mattered. Brian came home early, moving with a heavy, deliberate quiet that made the air in the kitchen feel thin. He dropped his bag and went straight to the sink, gripping a glass of water with both hands as if to anchor himself. Your father showed up at my office today, he said. The words were flat, stripped of any cushioning. I froze, my hand still on Theo's half-sealed lunch container. In downtown Columbus without calling, he told the security desk it was a family emergency. Brian said, keeping his voice low while Theo played nearby. In a firm like mine, that opens doors. He didn't get into my office, but he made it to the executive floor. I walked out of a meeting to find him talking to two senior partners. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking them if I'd mentioned how unstable you'd been lately. I sank into a chair. Gary wasn't just visiting. He was performing. He suggested therapy. Nicole, he told my bosses that financial stress was making you impulsive and emotionally overwhelmed. He was trying to turn my career into a lever to break your boundary. Brian handed me his phone. An email from a burner account displayed scanned foreclosure notices. At the bottom was a chilling line. Don't let her make a choice that ruins everyone. I handed the phone back, my fingers trembling. They're trying to make you the gatekeeper to my own life. Brian nodded. He tried to weaponize my job to get to you, looking at Theo's unguarded laughter. I realized this was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a siege. I walked to the closet and pulled down the bin of Theo's baby things. If Gary was willing to walk into a boardroom to get to my wallet, I was done negotiating. The email arrived just after Theo drifted off. I recognized the shift in my mother's voice before the first paragraph ended. It was soft, polished, and wearing a costume of humility. I wanted you to know we've started counseling. It read, the therapist says these situations are rarely one-sided. I sat at the kitchen table, the laptop screen casting a sterile blue glow. Brian stood nearby, drying a plate he had already finished minutes ago. She says we all carry a share of the emotional burden. The message continued. Holding boundaries can feel empowering. Nicole. But the counselor warned us that it often becomes a disguised form of punishment. We're being taught that forgiveness is a process of letting go, not a transaction for an apology. Brian stopped moving. She's weaponizing the therapy. I know, I said. It was a masterclass in deflection. By using words like process and one-sided, she was erasing Jason's cruelty. She wasn't repenting. She was diagnosing me. We hope you'll join a session when you're ready to heal, the email concluded. It might help you see how this estrangement is impacting everyone's mental health. I closed the laptop. She's not looking for a bridge. Brian. She's looking for a way to make me the patient so she can stay the victim. Then, My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Hi, Nicole. This is Marissa from Grace Fellowship. Your mother mentioned you're going through a season of isolation. We'd love to offer community support. Linda hadn't learned new tools to change. She had just learned a new language to bypass my front door. The next message came the following afternoon. While I was sitting in the carpool line, Hi, this is Jenna from the children's program at Grace Fellowship. Linda mentioned Theo might enjoy joining our weekend activities. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Theo was in the back seat, peeling the corner off a sticker book, humming to himself. Mom, he said, not looking up. Can I put this one on my lunchbox later? Sure, I said. My voice sounded normal. I needed it to. I didn't answer the message. I called the church instead. A woman picked up on the second ring. Cheerful, practiced, Grace Fellowship. This is Jenna. This is Nicole Sanders. I said, I'm calling about my son. There was a pause, brief but telling. Oh, yes. Linda spoke very highly of him. I didn't give permission for his information to be shared. Another pause. Longer this time. I assumed she had already talked to you, Jenna said. She said you might just need encouragement. No, I said. She doesn't speak for us. I'm sorry, Jenna replied quickly. That won't happen again. I ended the call and sat there with the engine running, the line inching forward. At home. Brian listened without interrupting. That wasn't a mistake. He said when I finished, that was a strategy. Theo climbed onto the couch between us, leaning back like he fit there perfectly. I opened my laptop that night and didn't hesitate. The email was short. Clear. No emotion to argue with. No contact through friends. No contact through church. No contact with Brian. This wasn't a boundary anymore. It was a stop. The house settled into a rhythm that didn't include them. Mornings were backpacks and mismatched socks. Afternoons were Theo at the table, tongue between his teeth as he worked through homework. Brian moving quietly around the kitchen. One evening, Theo brought home a worksheet folded in half. My family, he said, sliding it toward me. 3 names were written in careful block letters. Mine, Brian's, his. I pointed gently. Do you want to add anyone else? He shook his head, already reaching for a crayon. That's everyone who keeps me safe. I taped the paper to the fridge where we keep grocery lists and drawings that matter. It stayed there, untouched, as days passed without messages, without explanations demanded. Brian noticed before I did. You're lighter, he said one night, handing me a mug. I stopped waiting. I said, the words surprised me with how true they felt. I thought about the years I spent smoothing edges, explaining silences, asking for less so no one else would feel uncomfortable. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt finished, the kind of finished that doesn't echo. Protecting Theo stopped being a reaction. It became our normal. I learned what quiet felt like when it wasn't temporary. I learned that distance could be steady instead of sharp. And I learned that choosing this life didn't make me harder. It made me clearer. This is Nicole Sanders. This is where she chose to stand. If you stayed with her through it, you already know why some stories don't need closure to feel complete.